The judge's voice landed in that courtroom like a fist on a table. If no credible defense is presented by end of session today, this court will proceed directly to sentencing. The defendant is looking at 22 years. A bus driver. That is what Raymond Cole was. A 53-year-old black man who drove the number 47 night route through the east side of Memphis, Tennessee for 19 years without a single complaint, a single write-up, or a single day of unexcused absence. He sat at the defense table in a gray suit that was too big in the shoulders because he had borrowed it from his neighbor, Gerald Odom, who was 3 sizes larger and had offered it without being asked, his public defender. A young woman named Tara Simmons had a legal pad in front of her with very few notes on it. The prosecutor had a cart full of binders. Raymond had looked at that cart when he walked in and thought, someone spent a lot of time on this. He was right. Someone had. And here is the thing that nobody in that courtroom understood yet. Not the prosecutor, not the judge, not the 41 people sitting in the gallery. Raymond Cole had not once, not in 8 months of hearings and motions and sleepless nights, tried to defend himself. Not a word about what he had seen. Not a word about the night that started all of this. Not a word about the girl. Because the truth that would free him would expose someone he had spent 15 years protecting. Someone who had built an entire life on the foundation of his silence. And Raymond Cole was not the kind of man who burned down what someone else had built just to save himself. He had made that decision on a cold February night 15 years ago in the parking lot of a Greyhound station on Union Avenue. Today he was about to pay for it in front of everyone. And then the courtroom doors opened. A woman walked in. She was wearing a charcoal blazer and carrying a leather portfolio, and she walked like someone who was very accustomed to walking into rooms that were not expecting her. 2 men in dark suits followed her. One of them was carrying a document box. Raymond turned to look. He recognized her immediately. He had not seen her face in person since she was 19 years old and standing in the rain outside a Greyhound station with a garbage bag and nowhere to go. She was 30 for now, and she was a federal prosecutor. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let us know where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you are new here and you enjoy stories like this one, please hit that subscribe button now. Because what happens next in this courtroom is something you are going to want to be here for. Raymond Cole had driven the same route for so long that he knew every pothole, every traffic light cycle, every corner where the bus leaned a little too far if he took it too fast. He knew which stops filled up on Friday nights and which ones were empty by 2 in the morning. He knew the regulars by face and sometimes by name. The night shift nurses from Regional 1 Medical Center. The hotel workers heading home after the late checkout rush. The old man who always fell asleep between stops 6 and 9 and needed to be gently woken before the end of the line. Raymond knew all of them. He was 42 when he started driving for Memphis Area Transit Authority. He had come to it late, after a decade working loading docks at a distribution warehouse on the south side that had closed without warning in 2004, taking 312 jobs with it in a single Thursday afternoon announcement. Raymond had been there for 11 years. He had a locker with his name on it and a coffee mug on the break room shelf and 11 years of muscle memory for a job that no longer existed. He spent 8 months looking for work before the transit authority posting came through. The pay was not what the warehouse had been. The hours were harder in a different way, not physical but mental. The particular exhaustion of being responsible for other people's safety for 8 hours at a stretch. But Raymond was good at it. He was patient and steady, and he had the kind of temperament that did not rattle easily, which is exactly what you need when you are navigating a 40-foot vehicle through downtown Memphis at midnight with a full load of tired people who just want to get home. He lived alone in a 2-bedroom house on Ayers Street that he had been renting for 12 years from a landlord named Frank Dupree, who raised the rent every 18 months and fixed things on a timeline that could generously be described as eventual. Raymond had a vegetable garden in the backyard that he tended on his days off. Tomatoes, collard greens, a row of pole beans that climbed a wire fence he had built himself from materials he found at the Habitat for Humanity waste or on Lamar Avenue. He had no children. He had been married once, briefly, in his early 30s, to a woman named Denise, who was kind and funny and ultimately wanted a life that Raymond's schedule could not accommodate. They had parted without bitterness. He still sent a card at Christmas. She still sent one back. That was Raymond Cole at 52, quiet, reliable. The kind of man who existed in the margins of other people's days, moving them from one place to another, seen but not noticed, present but not remembered. He had not always been invisible. There was a version of Raymond from before the warehouse closed, before the years of looking for work, before the slow erosion of ambition that poverty performs on a person without their noticing. That version had plans. He had been taking night classes in electrical engineering at Southwest Tennessee Community College. He had been 3 semesters from a certificate that would have opened a different set of doors entirely. Then the warehouse closed, and the tuition money became rent money, and the night classes became night shifts. And somewhere between 40 and 52, Raymond had made peace with the life he had rather than the life he had been pointed toward. That is not defeat. People who have never been poor do not understand that. Making peace with your life is not the same as giving up on it. It is something quieter and more complicated. It is deciding to find the meaning inside the life you actually have instead of spending every waking hour mourning the one you did not get. Raymond found his meaning in small things. The way the city looked from the driver's seat at 3 in the morning. The streets empty and orange under the sodium lights. The whole place belonging to nobody and everybody at once. The way the regular passengers nodded at him when they boarded. That small acknowledgement that said, "I see you. You are a part of my day. You matter in this specific and practical way." And the garden. Always the garden. The particular satisfaction of putting something in the ground and watching it become something else. That was Raymond Cole at 52. And then February came, and the night that changed everything arrived without warning, the way the most important nights always do. It was a Tuesday, February 9, 2009. The temperature had dropped to 21 degrees by 11 at night. The kind of cold that Memphis is not built for. The kind that catches the city off guard every few years and reminds everyone that the South is not immune to winter. Raymond was running the last loop of his shift, the 2:15 in the morning run that picked up the stragglers, the people who had missed the earlier buses or who worked the very latest of late shifts. The route took him past the Greyhound station on Union Avenue, which was one of his regular stops. He pulled up at 11:47 at night. There was one person waiting, a girl. She was young, 19, maybe 20, black, thin, wearing a jacket that was not warm enough for the weather and carrying a garbage bag that appeared to contain everything she owned. She had the look of someone who had been sitting in the cold for a long time and had decided that sitting in the cold was still better than whatever she had left behind. She boarded the bus. She did not have exact change. She had a crumpled $5 bill and she held it out to Raymond with a hand that was shaking from the cold. Raymond looked at her. He looked at the garbage bag. He looked at her shoes, canvas sneakers, entirely wrong for the weather. The left one held together at the toe with a strip of duct tape. He pressed the button that cleared the fare. She looked at him like she was waiting for the catch. "There is no catch," Raymond said. "Sit down and get warm." She sat in the first row behind the driver's partition, and she did not speak for a long time. Raymond drove. The bus was otherwise empty. The city slid past the windows, or engendered darkened cold. After about 10 minutes, she said, quietly, "Thank you." Raymond nodded. Another few minutes passed. "You got somewhere to go?" he asked. A pause. "Not really," she said. Raymond drove another 2 stops. He thought about what he was about to do and whether it was wise, and then he thought about the temperature outside and the duct tape on her shoe, and he stopped thinking about whether it was wise. "There is a shelter on Beale," he said. "The one run by the church, not the city one. It is safer. I can tell you exactly where it is." She was quiet for a moment. "I know the city one," she said. "I cannot go back there." Raymond did not ask why. He had been driving this route long enough to understand that some answers are contained entirely in the way a person says a sentence. He drove to the end of his route. He clocked out. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment after the last passenger had gone, and then he walked back to where she was still sitting. "My name is Raymond," he said. She looked up at him. "Destiny," she said. Destiny Hargrove. She was 19 years old. She had been in the foster care system since she was 7. She had aged out for months earlier and had been placed in a transitional housing program that had, in her words, become a situation she could not stay in. She had a garbage bag and $11 and a bus ticket she had already used and nowhere to go. Raymond drove her to the church shelter on Beale Street himself, in his own car, after his shift. He walked in with her and spoke to the overnight coordinator, a woman named Patricia Holt, and made sure Destiny had a bed-and-a-meal voucher for the morning. He gave her his phone number on a piece of paper. "If you need anything," he said, "I drive this route every night. You can always find me." She looked at the paper for a moment. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Raymond thought about it. "Because it is cold," he said. "And because you needed someone too." He went home. He went to sleep. He went back to work the next night and the night after that. Destiny Cole. 3 weeks later. She had found a part-time job at a laundromat on South Main. She needed a reference for an apartment application. Raymond gave one. He checked in on her periodically over the following months. Not intrusively. The way you check on someone you have decided to hold a small piece of responsibility for. A text every few weeks. A conversation at the bus stop when their paths crossed. She was doing the work. That was clear. She was building something from almost nothing. And she was doing it with a focus and a discipline that Raymond recognized as the particular determination of someone who has decided they are never going back to where they came from. By the end of that year, she had enrolled in community college. By the following year, she had transferred to the University of Memphis on a partial scholarship. Raymond did not take credit for any of this. He had given her a bus ride and a reference and a phone number. She had done everything else herself. But here is what Raymond did not know, what he would not know for years. On the night he drove her to the shelter, on that cold February night, something had happened after he dropped her often before he got back in his car. He had been standing in the parking lot of the shelter for a moment, just standing. The way you stand when you have done something that felt right and you want to let that feeling settle before you drive away. And he had seen something. Across the street from the shelter, in the parking lot of a closed auto parts store, there was a police cruiser. And beside the cruiser, in the orange wash of a single working streetlight, there were 2 officers and a young black man who was already on the ground with his hands behind his back. Raymond had seen traffic stops. He had seen arrests. He drove the night route through Memphis for years and he had seen things in the dark that the daylight city did not know about. But this was different. The young man on the ground was not resisting. He was not moving at all. He was face down and still, and one of the officers was kneeling on his back with a weight that had nothing to do with restraint and everything to do with something else entirely. The second officer was standing a few feet away, and he was looking directly at Raymond. Raymond stood very still. The officer did not move. He just looked. The kind of look that is not a warning so much as a notation. A filing away. "I see you seeing this." Raymond got in his car and drove home. He did not sleep that night. He spent the next 3 days trying to decide what to do. He called the police non-emergency line once and hung up before anyone answered. He drove past the auto parts store parking lot twice, in daylight, looking at the asphalt, as if the ground would tell him something. He found the news item on the 4th day. A brief report in the Memphis Commercial Appeal. A man named Andre Simmons, 24 years old, had been arrested in the Beale Street area on charges of assault on a law enforcement officer and resisting arrest. He was being held without bail pending a psychiatric evaluation. Raymond read that and sat with it for a long time. Andre Simmons, 24 years old. Assault on a law enforcement officer. He had seen that young man on the ground, face down, not moving, not resisting. He had seen what was being done to him. And he had also seen the officer's face. He knew that face, not personally, but he had seen it on the route. Officer Dale Pruitt, 11-year veteran of the Memphis Police Department. He worked the East Side District, which overlapped with Raymond's route. And Raymond had seen him at stops, at intersections, had nodded at him the way you nod at someone who is a fixture of the same geography. Pruitt had a reputation. Raymond had heard it from passengers, from the night shift workers who talked on the late buses the way people talk when they think no one important is listening. Pruitt was the kind of officer who found what he was looking for because he decided in advance what he was going to find. Raymond thought about calling the paper. He thought about calling a lawyer. He thought about walking into the precinct and making a statement. And then he thought about Destiny Hargrove, 19 years old, garbage bag, duct tape on her shoe, just starting to build something from nothing. If Raymond made a statement, Pruitt would know who had made it. Pruitt would know it was the bus driver from the parking lot. And Pruitt, Raymond understood with a clarity that had nothing to do with paranoia and everything to do with 15 years of driving the night route through this city. Pruitt would find a way to make Raymond's life very difficult. And Raymond's life being made difficult meant his job being threatened. And his job being threatened meant the reference he had given Destiny becoming a liability. And Destiny, who was just barely holding on, who was sleeping in a church shelter and working at a laundromat and taking community college classes on 3 hours of sleep. Destiny could not afford for the one person who had vouched for her to become a problem. So Raymond made a decision. He made it the way people from his part of the city always made decisions. Not between good and better, between bad and worse. He stayed quiet. He stayed quiet and he watched Andre Simmons get convicted of assault on a law enforcement officer and sentenced to 4 years in Shelby County Correctional Center. He stayed quiet and he watched Dale Pruitt get a commendation 6 months later for his work in the East Side District. He stayed quiet and he watched Destiny Hargrove graduate from the University of Memphis with a degree in political science, and then get into law school at Vanderbilt, and then pass the bar, and then join the United States Attorney's Office for the Western District of Tennessee. He stayed quiet for 15 years, and then the quiet ended. If you are still watching, drop a comment right now that says, "I am still here." Because what is about to happen in this story is the part that most people never get to see. The part that usually stays buried. The part that is coming for Dale Pruitt whether he is ready for it or not. The call came on a Thursday morning in March of 2024. Raymond was in his backyard pulling weeds from the bean rows when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost did not answer. "Mr. Cole." "Yes, this is Detective Sergeant Brian Watts of the Memphis Police Department, Internal Affairs Division. I was hoping you might be available to come in for a conversation." Raymond set down his trowel. He had been around long enough to know that a conversation with Internal Affairs is never just a conversation. He went anyway. He sat in a beige interview room in the Shelby County Justice Center on Poplar Avenue, and Detective Sergeant Watts, a heavy-set man in his late 40s with the careful eyes of someone who has been lied to professionally for a very long time, placed a folder on the table. Inside the folder were photographs. Security camera images, grainy but clear enough. A bus. A parking lot. A man standing beside a car. Raymond looked at the photographs. The images were from the parking lot of the Greyhound station on Union Avenue. February 9, 2009. 11:47 at night. They showed Raymond's bus. They showed Raymond standing in the parking lot of the shelter across the street. They showed in the background the partial outline of a police cruiser and two figures and a third figure on the ground. Someone had found these images. Someone had held onto them for 15 years. And now someone was using them. Watts explained the situation with the flat efficiency of a man reading from a prepared summary. Raymond Cole was being investigated for obstruction of justice, specifically for witnessing a use of force incident in February of 2009 and failing to report it, and for allegedly making a statement to a third party in 2011 that constituted interference with an ongoing investigation. Raymond had made no such statement. He had said nothing to anyone, but the documentation in front of him suggested otherwise. There was a typed affidavit, signed, bearing Raymond's name and employee identification number from the Transit Authority, stating that he had witnessed the incident and chosen not to report it in exchange for, and this was the part that made Raymond's chest go cold, in exchange for professional favors related to his employment. It was fabricated, every word of it. Raymond knew this the way you know when someone describes you doing something you did not do. Not from any specific detail but from the sheer totality of wrongness. The whole picture refuses to fit itself around any moment in your actual life. He had not taken a single favor. He had not made any deal. He had stayed quiet for one reason, and one reason only, and it had nothing to do with anything in that affidavit. He was formally charged 6 days later. Obstruction of justice. Conspiracy to conceal a use of force incident. Filing a false statement. The charges added up to a potential sentence of 22 years. He was released on his own recognizance because he had no prior record, and his public defender, Tara Simmons, who was clearly carrying too many cases, managed to argue for it convincingly. He walked back to his house on Eyre Street and sat in his kitchen and thought for a very long time. He did not call Destiny. He had her number. He had always had her number. She had given it to him when she passed the bar and told him to use it if he ever needed anything. And he had never once used it because Raymond Cole did not ask for things. He put the phone down every time because the charges were one thing. The charges were, in theory, something that the truth could eventually correct. But if Destiny started digging into Raymond's history to defend him, she would find the thing he had buried. The night in the parking lot. The thing he had seen. The reason he had stayed quiet. And if that came out, all of it, the whole true story, Raymond was not certain what it would mean for her, for the career she had built, for the cases she was working, for everything she had constructed from a garbage bag and a bus ride in 15 years of relentless, grinding work. So he stayed silent. He sat across from Tara Simmons and answered her questions carefully and said nothing about anything else. He went to his preliminary hearing and stood in a courtroom for the first time in his 53 years and listened to a prosecutor named Kevin Ashby, a compact man in an expensive suit who had the bearing of someone who wins most of the time, lay out a case that sounded devastating and was built entirely on manufactured evidence. And Raymond stood straight and kept his hands still in thought. Someone worked very hard on this. Someone with access and resources and patience. He already knew who. Dale Pruitt was no longer a patrol officer. He had been promoted 3 times in 15 years. He was now Deputy Chief of Operations for the Memphis Police Department, the second highest-ranking officer in the department, with oversight of internal affairs, evidence management, and officer conduct review. He had built himself a fortress. And Raymond Cole, the bus driver who had been standing in the wrong parking lot on the wrong night 15 years ago, was the one loose stone in the foundation of that fortress. Raymond was sitting at his kitchen table at 11:30 on a Wednesday night, 3 weeks after the charges were filed, eating a bowl of soup and reading through the discovery documents, when his phone rang. "Unknown number," he answered. "Raymond." He recognized the voice immediately. He set down his spoon. "How did you find out?" he asked. "The court filing is public record," Destiny said. "I have been monitoring his name for 2 years. When your name came up in connection with his, I knew." A pause. "Why did you not call me?" Raymond was quiet for a moment. "I did not want you involved." "Raymond." Her voice shifted. Lower. The voice of the federal prosecutor now, not the girl from the bus. "Listen to me. I have been involved since I was 19 years old, standing in a parking lot in the cold. The only question is whether we do this together, or whether I do it without knowing what you know. And if you choose without, I am still doing it. I will just be doing it blind." Raymond closed his eyes. "There are things," he said carefully, "connected to this. Old things. Things I need to tell you before you go any further. Then tell me. Not on the phone." A long pause. "I will be there Saturday," Destiny said. And she hung up. She arrived on Saturday morning in a rental car, alone, which told Raymond something about how seriously she was treating this. Destiny Hargrove did not travel alone on official business. She was here as something more than a federal prosecutor. She was here as the person who owed Raymond Cole a debt that had been accumulating interest for 15 years. She sat at his kitchen table and he made coffee and he told her everything. He started with the night he had found her at the Greyhound station. She knew that part. She knew the outline of it the way you know the story of how you came to exist. The shape of it without the granular texture of the actual experience. Then he told her the part she did not know, The parking lot across the street from the shelter. The police cruiser. The young man on the ground. The officer's face in the orange light, looking directly at Raymond with that particular look that was not a warning but a notation. He told her about Andre Simmons, about the conviction, about the 4 years in Shelby County Correctional. He told her about Dale Pruitt's commendation. He told her about the decision he had made and why he had made it, and what it had cost him to hold it for 15 years. Destiny sat very still while he talked. She had her hands flat on the table, the way people sit when they are receiving something heavy and they do not want to drop it. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet for a long time. "You stayed quiet because of me," she said. "Yes." She looked at the table. "Andre Simmons," she said. "Do you know where he is now?" Raymond shook his hand. "I know he served the full 4 years. After that, I lost track." Destiny was already reaching for her phone. She looked something up. Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes did. A tightening, a gathering of focus that Raymond recognized from the 19-year-old girl who had decided she was never going back to where she came from. "He was released in 2013, she said. "He has been working as a mechanic in Bartlett since 2015. No further record." She put the phone down. "He has been out here this whole time," Raymond said. "Yes." "And Pruitt has been deputy chief." "Yes." Another silence. "We are going to need everything," Destiny said. "Every document, every record, every communication you have ever had with anyone connected to this case. Every piece of paper from the Transit Authority going back 15 years. Everything." Her voice was completely calm. "I am going to take this apart. The charges against you, the evidence trail, the person behind the evidence trail, and what happened to Andre Simmons in that parking lot 15 years ago. I am going to take it apart and lay it out in that courtroom, and you are going to walk out of there." She paused. "But I need you to trust me completely. No more protecting me from things I need to know. I am not 19 years old in a church shelter anymore, Raymond." Raymond looked at her for a long moment. He nodded. "Okay," he said. "You have all of it. What happened in the 7 weeks between that Saturday morning and the trial date was something Raymond was only partially aware of as it occurred, because Destiny moved with a focused, coordinated precision that operated largely out of his sight. He understood later, when she walked him through it the night before the trial, what she had assembled. It was not simply a defense. It was a comprehensive dismantling, not just of the charges against Raymond, but of the entire architecture that had produced those charges in the 15-year-old crime that had made them necessary. Destiny filed immediately to appear as co-counsel alongside Tara Simmons, who agreed without hesitation. She filed for full discovery and subpoenaed every document, digital record, and communication related to the obstruction charges for the previous 3 years. She also filed a separate motion in a different court, under a different case number, that Raymond did not know about until 2 weeks before the trial. She had found Andre Simmons. She had driven to Bartlett on a Tuesday evening and sat in the parking lot of the auto repair shop where he worked and waited until his shift ended. She had introduced herself. She had told him who she was and why she was there. Andre Simmons had looked at her for a long moment. Then he had said, "I have been waiting for someone to come for 11 years. He had his own documentation. He had kept records, the way people keep records when they know what happened to them, and know nobody will believe them without proof. Medical records from the night of his arrest showing injuries inconsistent with the official report. A letter he had written to the police department's complaint office in 2011 that had been returned and opened. The name of a witness, a woman who had been walking her dog near the parking lot that night, who had given a statement to a legal aid attorney in 2012 that had somehow never made it into any official file. Destiny had found the legal aid attorney. She had found the statement. She had also, through channels that involved 3 federal subpoenas and a judge in Nashville who owed nobody in the Memphis Police Department any favors, obtained the internal communications from Dale Pruitt's office going back to 2022. Those communications included a series of messages between Pruitt and a lieutenant in the Evidence Management Division named Gary Stokes, discussing in language that was careful but not careful enough the fabrication of the affidavit bearing Raymond's name. Pruitt had built his fortress carefully. But he had built it with people. And people, under sufficient pressure, make mistakes. Gary Stokes had made the mistake of using his department email. The trial of Raymond Cole on charges of obstruction of justice was scheduled to begin on a Monday morning in October of 2024 in courtroom 7 of the Shelby County Criminal Court on 2nd Avenue. It had attracted modest local attention. A bus driver charged with covering up a police use of force incident is a serviceable news story. Nothing more. Kevin Ashby had prepared with the confidence of someone who believes in his evidence. He did not know what was coming. Nobody did, except Destiny, and Raymond, and Andre Simmons, who was sitting in the third row of the gallery, in a clean button-down shirt, watching the door. Raymond wore Gerald Odom's borrowed suit. He sat at the defense table and breathed and looked at his hands and waited. Destiny sat beside him. She had a legal patent, a pen, and the particular stillness of someone who has been preparing for something for a very long time and is finally here. In the gallery, 4 rows behind the prosecution table, in a seat near the aisle, sat a man in a dark suit, silver at the temples, the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Dale Pruitt, Deputy Chief of Operations, Memphis Police Department, attending the trial of the man he had framed, because he was that confident. He had been that confident for 15 years. He was about to stop being confident. Ashby's opening was tight and efficient. 15 minutes. The photographs, the affidavit, the timeline. Raymond Cole had witnessed the use of force incident, had failed to report it, and had made a statement constituting interference with an investigation. The evidence was clear. The documentation was thorough. Destiny's opening was 4 minutes long. She said, "The evidence against my client exists. Every document the prosecution described is real in its physical form. What I will demonstrate over the course of this trial is that every single one of those documents was created by the same person who committed the act my client witnessed 15 years ago. I will show this court not only who fabricated them, but why. And I will show that the why connects to something that has been buried in this city for 15 years and ends today." Ashby objected before she finished. Judge Caroline Marsh, known in the Memphis legal community for her precision and her intolerance for anything that smelled like a shortcut, sustained part of the objection and told Destiny to constrain her opening to the current charges. Destiny nodded pleasantly and sat down. She had said what she needed to say. The prosecution presented its case through 3 witnesses. A transit authority records officer, a digital forensics analyst who had authenticated the affidavit, and a detective named Roy Calloway who had handled the initial investigation. Destiny cross-examined each one. With the records officer, she established that Raymond's employee identification number, which appeared on the affidavit, had been accessed from a terminal outside the transit authority's own system, specifically from a Memphis Police Department administrative workstation, on a date 14 months before the charges were filed. The records officer confirmed this. He seemed puzzled by the question, as though he had not previously considered why a police department workstation would be accessing a transit authority employee file. With the forensics analyst, she established that the analyst's firm had been engaged directly by the Office of the Deputy Chief of Operations rather than by the District Attorney's Office, which was standard procedure. The analyst confirmed this. With Detective Calloway, she asked one question. Had Detective Calloway independently verified the origin of the referral that initiated the investigation of Raymond Cole? Calloway paused. He had not. The referral had come through official channels. From which office, Detective? Calloway checked his notes. The Office of the Deputy Chief of Operations. "Thank you," Destiny said. And she sat down. The defense case began on the 2nd morning. Destiny called Andre Simmons to the stand. The room shifted when he walked in. Not dramatically. The way a room shifts when something enters it that changes the weight of the air. He was 39 years old. He walked to the stand with the careful dignity of a man who has been waiting a long time to be in a room where someone was finally going to listen. He testified for 1 hour and 47 minutes. He described the night of February 9th, 2009, in the parking lot of the auto parts store on Union Avenue. He described what had been done to him. He described the injuries. He described the charges that had been filed against him in the 4 years he had served. He described the complaint letter that had been returned and opened. He described, with a precision that had the quality of something rehearsed, not because it was fabricated but because it had been rehearsed in his own mind 10,000 times over 15 years. The face of the officer who had knelt on his back. He pointed at Dale Pruitt. Pruitt did not move. He sat with the stillness of a man who has decided that stillness is his best remaining option. Destiny then called the woman who had been walking her dog. Her name was Margaret Fowler. She was 61 years old. She had given a statement to a legal aid attorney in 2012 and had spent 12 years wondering why nothing had ever come of it. She described what she had seen from the sidewalk. She described the officer kneeling on the young man's back. She described the second officer standing nearby, looking across the street at a bus driver standing in a parking lot. Then Destiny called Dale Pruitt. He had not been subpoenaed for the defense. He had been invited through a formal request for a witness who could speak to departmental procedures. A request so blandly procedural that his attorney had seen no reason to object. Pruitt walked to the stand in his dark suit and sat down and looked at Destiny with the composed confidence of a man who has spent 15 years being untouchable and believes, even now, that he still is. Destiny asked him about his role, about his tenure, about the forensics firm engagement, about the Transit Authority records access, about the affidavit. Pruitt answered each question with the systematic, steady mendacity of a man who has been lying institutionally for so long that he has forgotten what the truth feels like in his mouth. But here is the thing about systematic lies. They have a structure, and a person who understands the structure can find the load-bearing point. Destiny found it in the internal communications. She introduced Defense Exhibit 29, the series of messages between Pruitt and Gary Stokes discussing the affidavit. She read 3 of them aloud. She read them slowly, with the particular patience of someone who wants every word to land in the room and stay there. Pruitt modified his answers. Destiny produced the original answers. Pruitt modified again. Destiny produced the server backup. Then she said, "Deputy Chief Pruitt, I want to ask you about something. On the night of February 9, 2009, were you present in the parking lot of the auto parts store on Union Avenue near the Beale Street shelter?" Ashby was on his feet instantly. Objection. Relevance. "This is outside the scope entirely, Your Honor," Destiny said without looking away from Pruitt. "The relevance will be established immediately." Judge Marsh looked at her. "Proceed." Briefly, Deputy Chief Pruitt. On the night of February 9, 2009, were you present in that parking lot? A silence. In the gallery, the man in the dark suit had gone very still. "I was not," Pruitt said. Destiny reached into her folder. "Your Honor, I would like to introduce Defense Exhibit 31. She placed the document on the prosecution table and carried a copy to the judge's bench. "This is a Memphis Police Department duty log for the night of February 9, 2009, showing Officer Dale Pruitt assigned to the East Side District, Unit 47, with a log position check at 11:50 to at night placing his vehicle at the intersection of Union Avenue and Danny Thomas Boulevard. That intersection is 140 feet from the parking lot of the auto parts store." The room was no longer quiet. It was making the kind of sound rooms make when 40 people all adjust in their seats at once. Pruitt's attorney asked for an emergency recess. Judge Marsh granted 15 minutes. During those 15 minutes, Raymond sat at the defense table and looked at his hands and breathed. Destiny sat beside him and did not speak. She did not need to. When the court reconvened, Destiny introduced for more exhibits. The first was the legal aid statement from Margaret Fowler, the original document from 2012, with the chain of custody showing that it had been received by the Memphis Police Department Complaint Office and subsequently removed from the file by a supervisor whose name was on the removal log. The second was Andre Simmons's medical records from the night of his arrest, showing injuries to his back, his ribs, and his left shoulder that were inconsistent with the official report's description of a physical altercation initiated by the suspect. The third was a recorded statement from Gary Stokes, the lieutenant in evidence management, obtained 2 weeks earlier after Stokes had been confronted with the email communications and had made the decision, in the presence of his own attorney, to cooperate with the federal investigation that Destiny had quietly opened for months ago. Stokes described in careful and specific terms being directed by Deputy Chief Pruitt to access Raymond Cole's Transit Authority employee file, to construct a document bearing Raymond's identifying information, and to route that document through the forensics firm for authentication. He described being told that Raymond Cole was a loose end that needed to be managed before Pruitt's name came up in a departmental review that was scheduled for the following year. A loose end. That was what Raymond Cole was to Dale Pruitt. 19 years of driving the same route through the same city, and he was a loose end. The fourth exhibit was a federal indictment. Destiny placed it on the prosecution table and carried a copy to Judge Marsh and said, "Your Honor, I am also appearing today in my capacity as Assistant United States Attorney for the Western District of Tennessee. This indictment, filed this morning in federal court, charges Dale Pruitt with civil rights violations under Title 18 of the United States Code, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and conspiracy to deprive Andre Simmons of his constitutional rights under color of law." Ashby was silent. For perhaps the first time in his professional career, Kevin Ashby had nothing to say. Dale Pruitt was placed under arrest at 4:23 in the afternoon in courtroom 7 of the Shelby County Criminal Court while court was still nominally in session. He stood up when the federal marshals approached him. He stood very straight, the way a man stands when he is trying to hold on to the last piece of the identity he has spent a career constructing. And then, as the handcuffs went on, something happened that Raymond would think about for a long time afterward. Pruitt looked at Raymond, not with anger, not with the cold notation of the parking lot 15 years ago, with something else. Something that Raymond, who had driven the night route through this city for 19 years and had seen every version of human expression that the dark hours produce, recognized as the particular look of a man who has just understood, for the first time, the full weight of what he has done. Not the legal weight, not the professional weight, the human weight. The look of a man who has spent 15 years telling himself that Raymond Cole was a loose end, a variable, a problem to be managed, and who is only now, in this moment, in front of this room, understanding that Raymond Cole was a person, that Andre Simmons was a person, that the 19-year-old girl in the Greyhound station was a person, that every person he had reduced to a variable in the management of his own safety was a person who had continued to exist and to build and to become something, regardless of what he had done to them. Pruitt looked at Raymond for 3 seconds. Then the marshals walked him out. The courtroom processed this the way courtrooms process unexpected things, with a muffled roar and then the crack of Judge Marsh's gavel and then a silence that had a different quality than any of the silences before it. Lighter, as if the room had been holding its breath for 15 years and had finally exhaled. Judge Marsh looked at Kevin Ashby. She did not speak for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Ashby, in light of the evidence presented in the extraordinary circumstances of these proceedings, the court requests that the prosecution indicate by end of business today whether it intends to maintain the current charges against the defendant." Ashby looked at his table. He looked at his documents. He looked at the space where the federal marshals had just been. He said very quietly, "The prosecution will not be maintaining the charges, Your Honor." Marsh nodded. She looked at Raymond. She looked at him for what seemed like a long time with the expression of someone completing an assessment that takes into account many things at once. Then she said, "Mr. Cole, all charges against you are dismissed with prejudice. You are free to go." She picked up her gavel. She put it down without using it. "Court is in recess," she said. The prosecution's formal dismissal was filed at 8:51 the following morning. 2 paragraphs. The evidence underlying the charges had been demonstrated to be fabricated. The prosecution had no case. Charges dismissed. Destiny called Raymond to tell him. He was in his backyard. He was standing in the bean rows with his hands in the dirt, which was where he had been going every morning since the charges were filed, because the garden was the one place where the weight of everything felt manageable. He listened, he said, "Thank you." He put the phone down. He stood in the garden for a while. He thought about the February night 15 years ago and the girl with the duct tape on her shoe and the decision he had made in a parking lot in the cold. He thought about Andre Simmons, 39 years old, sitting in the third row of a courtroom in a clean button-down shirt, waiting for someone to finally listen. He thought about Pruitt's face in the moment the handcuffs went on. He thought about what it had cost. All of it. The silence, the years of carrying it, the 8 months of charges and hearings and borrowed suits, and the particular exhaustion of being accused of something you did not do. And he thought about what it had built, not for him, for Destiny, for Andre, for Margaret Fowler, who had given a statement 12 years ago and had spent 12 years wondering if it had mattered. It had mattered. It had always mattered. It had just taken 15 years and a federal prosecutor in a courtroom in Memphis to make that visible. Destiny came that afternoon. She brought food, the kind of meal you make an occasion of. And they sat at Raymond's kitchen table, the two of them, in the house where he had done the math on the decision he had made and decided it was worth making. Raymond looked at her. This woman who had been a girl with a garbage bag and $11 and a bus ticket she had already used. This woman who had built something from almost nothing and had used what she built to come back for the person who had helped her start. "I want to tell you something," Raymond said. She looked at him. "What you did," he said. "What you came back to do. I want you to know that I did not stay quiet because I expected anything in return. I want you to know that." "I know that," Destiny said. "I stayed quiet because it was the right thing to do at the time. And I would do it again." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know that too. That is why I came back." She looked at the table. "You gave me a bus ride," she said, "and a reference, and a phone number, and 15 years of silence that cost you everything." She looked up. "I got to give you one afternoon in a courtroom. That is not an even trade, Raymond. That is never going to be an even trade." Raymond shook his head. "You gave Andre Simmons his name back," he said. "That is not a small thing." "No," she said. "It is not." Outside, the October afternoon was doing what Memphis afternoons do in October. That low golden light that makes the whole city look like something worth staying for. Raymond looked at the garden through the kitchen window. The bean rows, the tomato cages, the collard greens going dark and full in the fall air. He thought about the version of this story where he had driven past the Greyhound station that night without stopping. The version where Destiny Hargrove had spent another night in the cold and had become something else or nothing at all. The version where Andre Simmons had served his 4 years and come home and Raymond had never known his name. He thought about all the versions of this story that did not end here, in this kitchen, with this person. There were many of those versions. This was the only one where they were all still here. As for Dale Pruitt, the federal case moved forward with the particular thoroughness that federal cases bring when the evidence is solid and the prosecutor is motivated. He was convicted on all 4 counts. 14 months later in federal court, he was sentenced to 9 years in a federal correctional facility. He lost his pension. He lost his rank. He lost the fortress he had spent 15 years building. Gary Stokes received a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation and was dismissed from the department. Andre Simmons filed a civil rights lawsuit against the city of Memphis. It was settled for an amount that was not made public, but that his attorney described in a brief statement outside the courthouse as meaningful accountability. The Memphis Police Department, under pressure from the Department of Justice, implemented a mandatory body camera policy and an independent civilian oversight board with subpoena power. Neither of these things undoes what was done, but they are the difference between a city that learns from what happened and one that does not. And Raymond Cole went back to his garden. He did not go back to driving the bus. He had retired the previous year, just before the charges were filed, and he had no intention of unretiring. He had his garden and his house on Ayers Street in the particular quiet of a man who has put down a weight he has been carrying for a very long time and is still getting used to the feeling of his own hands without it. Destiny called every few weeks. They talked the way people talk when they have been through something together that most people will never understand, easily and without needing to explain the context of anything. She was working on another case. She was always working on another case. Raymond thought about that sometimes. About the chain of it. One decision on one cold night in 2009, and what it had set in motion. Not just for Destiny, For every person she had ever stood up for in a courtroom, for every case she had ever taken that someone with less determination would have let go. You cannot trace those lines all the way out. You cannot see the full shape of what one person's choice produces when it ripples forward through 15 years of other people's lives. But you can feel it. You can feel it the way Raymond felt it standing in his garden in October, with the beans climbing the wire fence he had built himself and the light going gold over the rooftops of Ayers Street. The truth had been told. The weight had been lifted. And somewhere in Bartlett, a mechanic named Andre Simmons was going to work every morning knowing that what had been done to him had finally been named for what it was. That is not nothing. That is everything. Now I want to ask you something before we go. Think about the Raymond Coles in your own life. The quiet ones. The ones who drive the night routes and tend the gardens and carry the things they cannot say because saying them would cost someone else too much. The ones who make decisions in cold parking lots with no witnesses and no reward, no guarantee that it will ever matter. How often do we see them? How often do we understand what they have given until we are sitting in a courtroom watching someone try to take the last thing they have? And we realize only then, only at that late hour, how much of who we are was built on a foundation that one person laid with their hands alone in the quiet, when no one was watching. And ask yourself this: if it had been you, standing in that parking lot on that February night, looking at what Raymond looked at, knowing what reporting it would cost, what would you have done? It would have been so easy to get in the car and drive away. It would have been the sensible thing, the safe thing, the thing that protected your job and your routine and the careful life you had built from the wreckage of the one you lost. But Raymond Cole was not a man who confused what was safe with what was right. And that distinction, that small, quiet, costly distinction, is the reason a 19-year-old girl with a garbage bag became a federal prosecutor. It is the reason a man who served for years for something he did not do finally heard someone say his name in a courtroom and mean it. It is the reason a deputy chief in a dark suit finally understood, in the 3 seconds before the handcuffs went on, that the people he had reduced to variables were people all along. Raymond Briggs was not a hero in the way we usually use that word. He did not have a moment of glory. He did not get a parade. He went back to his garden the following Monday. That was just who he was. But the truth had been told. The weight had been lifted. And the people who might have been nothing were alive and whole and purposeful in the world. And they knew who they were and where they had come from and what it had cost. And on the level that actually matters, the level beneath achievement and recognition and the noise of the world, that is everything. That is absolutely everything. If this story moved you the way it moved me, if it made you think about someone in your own life who carries more than you know, please share this video. Drop a comment below and tell me, who is the Raymond Cole in your life? Who is the person who gave quietly and never asked for credit? Let us honor them, even if it is just in the comments. Even if it is just in words. They deserve to be seen. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it now. Because we tell stories like this every single week. And you do not want to miss what is coming next.